Hi, this is Ken Parker, and I'm here with my friend Matt Yasmin, and we are here for the little show we call Legal Angle, where we talk about issues in the news.
From a legal perspective.
Hey, Matt, great to see you, man. How you been?
I've been really well, Ken. Thanks. How about yourself?
Pretty well. I hear you did some traveling recently.
Yep. I was out in San Diego for the annual meeting of the International Trademark Association.
That is a party, man.
It was 5 days of parties and also panels and table topics and lots of networking and meeting with counsel that I worked with.
So you had a
in
good
other
time,
countries.
though?
I had a great time. San Diego's lovely.
Yeah.
I know you've been. I've been a couple times, not in a long time.
Well, you know, I'm a native Californian, so I welcome you to my home turf there.
Very gracious
I was very
of
young
you.
when I moved to Newton, but still.
Very gracious of you. Yeah, it was lovely. The conference was great. INTA does a great job. And wow, I mean, I was glad that I was able to go.
And once again, Matt, there's like nothing happening in the world to talk about from a legal perspective tonight.
We've really had to scrounge this past month to find some topics to bring to you all tonight because so little has happened that has issues.
But in all seriousness, there's so much. That's why it's so good that we invented our lightning round, because that allows us, we try to cram in like as many of the major things that are going on in the world as we can, but we really only have time for 3 or 4 major topics. And then there's like a million others that are left on the cutting room floor, as it were. But in our lightning round, we can at least touch on them. And if they are intriguing enough to our audience, people let us know, and we'll talk about them more on the next show. It seems like a reasonable bargain, don't you think?
Sure, yeah.
All right, so why don't you run down tonight's docket for us?
Well, we've got a lot on tap. We're hoping to get to it all, like always. First up, we've got a topic we're calling Begging Your Pardon, How Much?
How much?
How much?
How frickin' much?
A lot, that's how much, and we'll elaborate. Next up, we have a topic that we've named Jenny from the Block, You and Your Use of My Photos, and you'll see why we've named it that in a moment.
But whose photos? That's what makes it particularly interesting.
That's a big part of the question. Third, we've got Access Denied, the U.S. Copyright Office and AI, and happenings there.
And what can get you fired in the Trump administration?
It's a long list.
Spoiler alert, doing your job.
That's on the list. Fourth, we've got You Can't Say That, School Speech Edition, this time about school speech.
Right. And what can be banned and what isn't banned in the academic or academic adjacent environment, I think we could say, in at least one of the cases.
In one of the cases, yeah. And this one, the one that's in the news, did happen at a school.
Right.
And then we have our lightning round. We're hoping to get through 4 topics. We'll see what we can get to.
Yeah, we got some breaking news. I can't wait to tell us folks about this breaking news.
This one barely made it on to tonight's show.
It was so breaking. Literally, this court decision came down like as we'd already made our agenda,
it was
and we're
around 4
squeezing
p.m.
that in.
Yeah.
People are going to find this very interesting. It is, I will have to say, one of the most extraordinary federal court decisions I have ever read in one particular regard, which we will talk about.
Yep. And then the other 3 are Dazed and Confused and Sued. Again.
Because I'm always sued when I'm dazed and
Another
confused.
music title reference for frequent listeners, fans of the show. Third in there is Dragon Law, and you'll see why.
Yeah.
And fourth, we've got
Good judgment it's about.
Fourth, we've got Trump and deportees again.
Yeah, that's going to be, I think, a recurring theme for as long as...
I'm getting the feeling.
As long as there is a Noam running...
Okay, let's dive on in.
Yes.
So, first up, Begging Your Pardon, how much?
Yeah. So, go. You.
Yeah. So the photo that we chose to go with this is of our nation's president, Donald Trump.
Do we have to look at that? All right.
Well, if you're wondering, I chose that photo because apparently he hates that photo. And
well, he also hates the portrait in Colorado in the State House. You heard it was commissioned.
No.
We'll put that. It's quite a little less offensive.
We'll get to it in June.
Next show.
All right. So this one is about a pardon that President Trump, pictured here on your screen, recently issued for somebody's crimes. Can you tell us about it, Ken?
Yeah. So there's this fellow named Paul Walzak. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he was on. He was in a very bad situation. He'd committed tax evasion, and he was going to have to pay, and I've highlighted this, $4.4 million in restitution. and spend a good long time in jail.
Yeah. As I recall, part of the tax evasion was that he'd used his client's money. I forget what he did for work.
Well,
But that he'd used some of his client's money
for personal use.
to live
Yeah,
a really
and
nice.
he was also involved in some other very sketchy things. But without going into his whole history of crimes, he was convicted by a jury of his peers.
Right.
He had a fairly long jail sentence ahead of him.
Yep.
But he had a loving mother.
And don't leave out, I know you said it before, but he was ordered to pay back.
$4.4 million, right?
Yeah, a lot of money.
So just keeping in mind that his mother had been involved in a plot to publicize a Biden family diary during the campaign.
I remember that one. Two people, or somebody had found Ashley Biden's, President Biden's daughter's
Right.
sobriety journal at a rental house that she'd left behind.
Yes, and it was
This
supposed
is
to be
something that you
returned
do
to her,
try to.
and they wanted to sell it. And
Yeah.
anyway, so the mom.
Well, I think it's worth pointing out what a political activist this now pardoned guy's mom is when they couldn't interest the Trump campaign in it. I want to emphasize that. They brought it to the Trump campaign in 2018 or 19, and the Trump campaign said, no, the lawyers for the Trump campaign said, no, we're not going to touch this.
It was in 2020, I believe.
Okay, I think it was found
the 2020
earlier.
re-election campaign.
Yes,
That
for that campaign.
Yes.
Trump lawyers said, no, we're not going to touch this. And at that point,
Because it was against Biden, that's why it was. Yeah.
right. And at that point, they brought it to, I think, Turning Point USA, one
Right.
of the right-wing activists.
Yeah. So
news outlets.
here's where where this lurid story takes us, though.
Yes.
Her son facing years in prison, and having to repay $4.4 million. Things are looking quite bleak for him. And then the mom hears that Trump is having a dinner in Mar-a-Lago.
Oh,
Recently, about a month ago.
that sounds innocuous.
Yeah, and
everybody
so-
likes dinner.
Dinner is a good meal. It's one of
Okay.
my top 3
Yeah.
or 4, depending on the day.
Sure.
But, first dinner, second dinner, I don't know, Hobbit-wise.
Yes.
But anyway, dinner's a fine meal. This dinner was more expensive than most Boston restaurants, even most New York restaurants. $1 million. Food must be good, right? No, it's not for the food, it's for the access to the President of the United States, who's going to be at this dinner. And so the mom signs right up, puts down her $1 million, and at the dinner, she tells her president and her host at the dinner about the sad story of her son and how he's going to have to spend time in jail and repay $4.4 million that he stole from the government in taxes and whatnot.
Well,
and
I'm sure that President Trump expressed sympathy for her.
I'm
And
sure-
for her son, and said, well, but was he convicted by a jury of his peers? I'm sorry, but he'll have to serve time and repay the money.
that's exactly what President Trump did not say. What President Trump
Really?
did, what this guy did say, was that you're pardoned. Because after receiving the $1 million payment,
Sorry, begging your pardon?
yes, exactly. He
How
says,
much?
May I? Said pardon me. He said pardon me, and Trump said sure for $1 million. So basically, what this amounts to is and by the way, just to be clear, this $1 million is not going to the federal government as the restitution was. It's going to Donald Trump. This is like through part of this whole crypto scheme, right? So people are buying $1 million. They're putting $1 million essentially into Donald Trump's pocket.
Right.
And actually, and by the way, we don't know how much more because they can, you had another dinner for the top crypto donors
Right.
and mostly foreigners. Apparently Mr. Sun, who was another, he was banned from the U.S. for his crypto crimes. Anyway, without getting sidetracked onto other malfeasance, the bottom line here is that a pardon was purchased for $1 million.
Okay, so I want to ask you about this, Ken, because I hear you when you say it was purchased, but what's wrong with this? 2 questions. One, was it really purchased? Like, they don't have a written contract that says, I'm going to pay you $1 million and then you're going to pardon my son, right? I mean, they probably don't. And 2, even if they did, So what? Does the Constitution say no, you can't
All
pay
right.
the president
so
to pardon
I think
someone?
what you're asking me is this an impeachable offense? Is that the gist of your question?
Well, I'm just asking, is there
All right.
anything
Well-
wrong with this?
Well, okay. First of all, rarely do crime lords have written contracts that say, I will do this murder for this amount of cash. That's not how these transactions usually take place.
Oh, right.
So yeah, you're allowed if one were to if Donald Trump were not the president of the United States and were to have done something that benefits someone else in what appears to be a quid pro quo, a jury would be allowed to make an inference. Say he was a mob boss, not a president, and had done something. So I would say there's a very strong inference that. I mean, this wasn't like a lot of presidents will make pardons at the end of their term, and there'll be a big list, and they're recommended. This pardon wasn't recommended by anyone. It wasn't at the end of the term. It came out of the blue, but it wasn't out of the blue exactly. It was after he got $1 million from the mom, and she explained the very sad story that her son was faced with, that he was going to have to, he did the crime, and now he was going to have to do the time and pay the restitution.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, so Trump did what any good crime boss would do.
Right.
He made a deal.
He made a deal. So I think I understood that before my last questions. So the real question is this an impeachable offense? Does it violate,
I'm glad you asked that.
Well, does it violate any provisions of the Constitution, or does it constitute high crimes and misdemeanors?
Yeah, so there's a lot of, first of all, high crimes and misdemeanors are not described in the Constitution. It doesn't say these are what they are.
Right.
But there's a lot of people who've been removed, impeached, and convicted for lesser things than selling services that are. So essentially, what Trump did is he used a public power, the pardon pen, for private gain. And using your office for private gain is almost the epitome, the definition, the pinnacle of impeachable offenses. That's it. That's your home run right there. That's not just a home run. That's your grand slam of impeachable offenses.
On that note, I'd like to remind everybody about the case of Rod Blagojevich, a once very popular rising star.
Illinois governor.
And governor of Illinois.
And he said, we've got something special here. What can we get for it?
I've got this, his words, and I'm working from memory here. I didn't prep this. I've got this thing, and it's just solid gold, and I'm not going to let it go for nothing.
A U.S. Senate seat.
That's what he said.
And how
yes.
long did he
Sorry, I
spend
didn't
in jail?
say.
Right.
It
when
was,
Obama was elected president, there was a vacancy in the Senate, and he was going to get to appoint someone to that seat.
Right. Under Illinois law, the governor was allowed to appoint
for a time, for a couple.
Yeah.
And then the person was presumably going to get elected after that. And so he tried to auction it off.
He did. Yeah. He made a lot of efforts to auction it off. He solicited bids effectively, not with written contracts.
And he spent a considerable amount of time in jail for it. I believe, didn't he get pardoned eventually? Or did he just get out?
Recall.
Did Trump pardon him in his first term to let him out a little early or commute a sentence? I don't remember.
You know, with everything else that happened in the news.
I think he did, but I could be wrong about that.
Well, then it's even more appropriate.
Anyway,
as an instructive example of what happens when, as you said, when someone uses public powers for private gain.
And the other thing, Matt, by the way, this is not an isolated instance.
No.
So it's not like he's just hit a grand slam or, you know, of corruption. He's hit for the cycle. I mean, he's got the single, double, and triple right there. And he does it regularly every game. I mean, he's more than doubled his wealth in the few months that he's been president by crypto. And what is this crypto? Crypto is numbers on a piece in a computer program that are not worth anything when you start, and they're only worth what people bid on them. They're not backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. They're not backed by gold bars. They have no inherent value. And so if you say to someone, hey, if I create a cryptocurrency, and I say, Matt, a Ken coin is, I've just created Ken coins. Will you give me $1 million for a Ken coin? You know what you're doing? You're giving me $1 million because a Ken coin is worth absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So both, and it's a family crime business too. It's not just Trump. His wife has her own, and the boys are involved as well.
Yep.
So, and they're basically grifting off the presidency to the maximum extent. I mean, this is the
it's
guy
true.
who had like the car. You remember the collection of him on a horse and
I
but at
recall.
least he was out of office for some of that. But this is now he's back in office and he's just monetizing the presidency.
Well, you're absolutely right, and there's so many different ways that he's monetizing it. The brilliance of the crypto coin as a way to bribe the president and curry favor with the president and his advisors
But just to
and
be
family
clear,
members.
the 20 highest buyers of it got to have dinner with him a
Right.
couple days ago.
I use the word deliberately. I'm not trying to just pick an easy word to use. It's bribery. It's a really clever way to get around the emoluments clause because they can paint it.
As they're buying something.
They're buying something, and it's something.
But it's something
of
that
value.
has no value other than
I agree, but they can paint it as they're buying something of
Right.
value. They're not just giving money to a PAC. They're not where there might be limits or
Yeah.
disclosure requirements. They're not giving money to his election campaign where there definitely are limits and disclosure requirements.
Right.
They're not giving money to him personally or the Trump
Right.
organization. They've found a new way for people to invest in something,
Yeah. And here's-
I'm putting air quotes around
Yeah.
invest, that where the money, as you said, simply goes directly to Trump and his family members.
Matt, I want to ask you about the next topic in a second, but I just
Yeah.
got to say one more thing about this one before we leave it.
Yeah.
The crypto piece of it is something that what we were calling for a while, his co-president, who maybe is not co-president as much as he used to,
Who knows?
this Doji guy or
Yeah.
Dodgy guy or whatever you
Dodgy
want.
indeed.
Elon Musk when he was slashing away at services that benefit people who live in this country, he said that Social Security was a Ponzi scheme. And to me, that sets off bright lights as to what is actually a Ponzi scheme. Crypto's a Ponzi scheme, and Musk has been a promoter of it. And even Trump, in an earlier life, said this is a scam. And then he realized he could get in on the scam.
Right.
And so
He was right. It was a scam.
I
but
mean, it's
a
one
scam.
of the few true things he said.
Yes, it's a scam that he and his crime family can use.
Yeah, no, it's just, and I'm going to say one more thing because we're referring to it as a crime family, and just to follow up on what we talked about last show, this isn't a question of partisan politics. I wouldn't be saying these things about a John McCain or a Mitt Romney. I disagreed with their policies. They were honorable public servants who had a different perspective. Donald Trump is a whole different critter. He's a criminal, and we put a criminal in charge of our country. And what do you expect when you put a crime boss in front of head of the government? It's happened, by the way, before in U.S. history on a municipal level,
Yep.
and even on a state level in Rhode Island. It's never happened on a national level before, but it's very predictable what would happen with it. And I don't think it's in any way partisan to observe what's going on.
No, I agree. There's plenty of examples of it from every
On the
political
big
party.
cities, and Democrats have
Yes.
done it.
Yep.
No Democrat in the White House has ever done it, though. This is the first president of any party that's ever done it.
Yeah. All right. What do we got next?
Yeah,
then?
I want to talk to you, Matt, because about Jenny from the block, of course. This lady here, J-Lo. I mean, I've got to say, I'm glad that in this day and age where we're talking about all this heavy policy stuff, and there's Matt and Ken going off again complaining about Trump, that we can talk about fluffy white dresses. Okay?
It's really, as she wrote, a very glamorous dress.
It is a glamorous dress. How could you get more glamorous, right? So Matt, J-Lo has some pictures. She puts them on social media. She uses them to promote some stuff she's doing. What's the big deal? Why can't there are pictures of her? Why can't she tell us what happened?
Yeah.
And what the big deal about it is?
Yeah, great questions. So, at a red carpet event, Jennifer Lopez, Jenny from the block, as
Excuse me, that doesn't look red, that carpet. I'm just saying.
well, I don't control the colors.
All right.
Jenny from the block, as a famous song of hers has it, was at an event in this dress, and people snap pictures of her. You know, news photographers, journalists, paparazzi. I forget the name of the person who took this picture or the company that owns rights to it. The photographer is a
There were
co-owner.
two. One of them was Edwin Blanco.
Thank you. And
By the way, Blanco white, and she's wearing white. It's kind of a little connection.
nice
there.
observation. Okay. He took those photos. J-Lo took the photos and posted them on social media to her own profile, Instagram, I believe, and said later that she did it to promote the dress designer, the person who made the dress, and to compliment her on the fabulous dress. And it really does, it looks great. The problem is...
I mean, it looks like she should be in an igloo, not in a,
Well,
not at a red carpet event.
I don't know, maybe the air conditioning is...
Little hot.
To each their own, Ken. The point is, Edwin Blanco took these photos. Jennifer Lopez posted them. Why can't she use them?
That might be Wampa.
Okay, we're gonna move on. We're gonna try and stay on topic here.
All right.
Why can't she use photos? She's in the photos. They're photos of her.
Right.
Why can't
so
she
why
post
can't
them?
she use so?
And the reason is she doesn't own them.
So Matt, explain to me and to our audience how it is that she could be in a photograph and not own that photograph. How can someone else own a photograph? If I take a picture of you, don't you own that photograph, Matt?
I do not. That's a great question, but the answer is no. A definitive no, unless certain conditions apply, and I'm presuming they don't. So in this case, he's a photographer. He's there to take pictures. He took pictures of her. He owns them because copyright attaches to a creative work the moment it's fixed in a tangible medium of expression.
And it's owned by the author.
And a photo counts as a creative work, fixed in a tangible medium, and it's owned by the author, absent some agreement or some operation of law. Like if the person worked for a company and were paid...
Work for hire, for example.
Well, yes, if he were, and I want to be clear about this because a lot of folks misunderstand the work for hire doctrine. If he works for a company as a regular employee and doing that thing as part of his duties, or he does it either on company time or with company assets, then work for hire applies.
Or if there's a specific contractual provision,
Right.
of course, that
Work-
says
right.
you're going to
So
take these pictures
the point
and
is
we're going to own them.
work for hire applies when someone is an employee, even without a contractual
But
provision.
this guy was not J-Lo's employee, nor did she have a contract
That's
with
right.
him.
So he had no contractual relationship with her. She didn't employ him. So because she didn't employ him, work for hire didn't apply. Because she didn't have a contract with him, the rights didn't transfer from Blanco.
So they're his
hang on, please.
pictures.
The rights didn't transfer from Blanco to Jennifer Lopez. So Blanco owns them, or his company.
Okay.
I believe it's him and his company.
All right,
own
but
them.
what about fair use? Can't she just, even if you don't own something under copyright, aren't there times when you get to use it?
There can be, yeah. And fair use is a defense to copyright infringement, but it's an affirmative defense. Only after someone has sued you and succeeded at making their case can you argue that fair use is a defense that saves you from liability for infringing their rights, such as by posting it to Instagram.
So how would she defend herself under the fair use defense against this?
Well, she'd have to say that her use, for instance, is not commercial, and there's an argument as to the facts behind that because it's not merely her posting a nice-looking picture of herself in a fabulous dress. What she said at the time, I believe, was that she was trying to promote the designer who made the dress for her. And is that a commercial use of this photo? It depends, right? Jennifer Lopez isn't posting the photo for commercial use for herself. But if she's promoting...
Well, according to the complaint, she is. She's
Well,
promoting herself, promoting her image.
Okay, but that's not exactly a commercial use. It's not like she's trying to sell soda pop or sneakers or whatever. But there's, I think, a better argument in the complaint as well, or I think they got to it, which is that if she's using this photo, which she does not own or have the right to use, for the commercial use of promoting the goods and services of somebody else, her dress designer, then that starts to look much more like a commercial use than just, hey, don't I look great in this dress?
Right. Well, if you're in the business of entertainment, then putting a photo of yourself online is inherently commercial, that promotion. And they are, I think they make that point in the complaint. Yeah. They were used, for example, to promote her public appearances, and she's a paid public appearance person.
Yes.
And it's inherently commercial to get her out. Maybe she gets a better part in something, gets a better... Anyway.
Yeah, a lot of the business of celebrities and actors and musicians and public personas, public personalities, is promoting yourself.
Yeah,
and I think they've got a fair shot at making that argument and making it stick.
Yeah, no, I don't think that there is much of a plausible fair use argument, because fair use, you're only using enough of a work to comment on it, to transform it in some way. This is not a transformative use. This is exactly the use the photographer took them for. So it's transformative using it in a different way. If you're like, if I'm quoting from an article that you write, Matt, and I say, well, Matt says this, but I disagree. I'm allowed to use some of your article to take the part and explain why I disagree with it. I'm not allowed to reprint the whole article. No. Already, they've used the whole, they failed on fair use right there.
Yeah.
And they failed on every prong of fair use. This doesn't have a chance.
Now, people might also wonder, why can't she use it? You know, it's a picture of her. I mean, the photo has no value if it weren't a photo of J-Lo, right?
I mean, maybe someone wants to see that jacket on somebody else. I don't know.
I mean, it's a nice-looking jacket, and I'd be happy to wear it, but I don't think anybody would be anywhere.
Luke Skywalker would have something to say about you wearing that wampa, I think.
I don't think it would be worth a millionth as much if it were me or you or any average person in that photo. The photo has value because it's Jennifer Lopez. Now, what people might wonder is, well, why doesn't she have some right to control its usage?
Like right of personality or something, right? Doesn't she?
Well, she sort of does, but not to use it herself, I don't think. And the reasons for that are complicated. The short answer is that there's no federal right of publicity or privacy right now in the U.S. that controls.
But there are state rights. Why didn't she have a right under a state law?
She probably does, but it's a patchwork. I believe it's 38 states have rights of publicity and privacy. They're all different. The three strongest are California, New York, and Tennessee.
And guess which one this was in? This was in California.
Well, of course it was. Why, Ken? Why are California, New York, and Tennessee?
Hollywood.
Yes, Hollywood, Broadway, and Nashville.
So here's the thing.
And Elvis.
Here's the thing, Matt.
That's why Tennessee has strong
Here's the thing people get confused
rights
about rights of personality and rights of publicity is it's a right not to have your name and image used deceptively. There's nothing deceptive about this. In other words, if you were to say that that Jennifer Lopez endorses Legal Angle with Matt Yasmin and Ken Parker, and you were to use that in an
Which
ad,
we are not saying.
we are not saying
that.
We don't. She might like the show. We don't know if she's been watching it online. We have no idea, one way or another. We're not saying she hates it.
We have no information.
but
you're right.
My point being only, Matt, that is you cannot take a celebrity, even if you own the picture. So that photographer couldn't say, Jennifer Lopez endorses my photography company. That would be a no-no.
That's right. That's right. And the important thing to note is that that right of publicity flows in the opposite direction from what Jennifer Lopez has done with this photo.
It's a negative right.
That's right. It's the right of Jennifer Lopez to stop the photographer from using that photo.
From misusing it, but he still owns it.
Right.
It's like you can own property and you can misuse it.
It's the right to stop him from using it for other commercial purposes, either on his own or by selling it to people, for people to use to promote their products with her. He can use the photo, he can sell it to news organizations, he can make prints of it. He's allowed to do all that.
He can commercialize it all he wants as long as it's not in a deceptive way saying that she's endorsing something.
Right,
she's not.
like Legal Angle, the news show where we talk about issues in the news from a legal perspective.
Which would be a real shame if Jennifer Lopez were to get on national television and say, I love to watch Legal Angle, because then, she can do that if she wants. That's fine.
Yeah, go for it.
That's good. All right.
Yeah.
We authorize it now.
Yes.
But we're not saying she's done it.
Right.
We're not claiming that Jennifer Lopez loves Legal Angle. Please be clear about that.
Yes.
All right. Matt, I think we've beaten this one.
I think we've exhausted that topic.
To a red carpet.
Okay. We'll revisit copyright on another day.
Oh, I think on the next topic, I believe.
Well, yes, but a different aspect of copyright.
Yes. Okay.
So the next topic we have for everyone is about the U.S. Copyright Office and AI and a denial of access. So briefly.
Do you want me to
to
lay it out? Or what,
I was just going to sketch it out and let you,
sounds good.
Let you go through it. So the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, which is not a government department,
and wasn't very efficient either. It spent more money than it saved, but okay.
Yes, yes. Well,
Deceptively named criminal organization.
yes. We don't know if they're criminals.
Okay. We do know that they are not, there's no place in the Constitution or laws of the United States for what they did.
Yes.
And there were funds appropriated by Congress, which they illegally diverted, as courts have already found, including USAID.
Yes.
And, okay. So,
Yes. And we also have our suspicions that they might be attempting some criminal or semi-criminal acts.
I believe that
One of which might be relevant to this topic.
Well, there's definitely one thing that's clearly a criminal act. Is it's a criminal. You know, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act has criminal provisions in it.
Yes.
And things that we already know they did with people's personally identifiable information. It's clearly a violation of the criminal portion. There's a civil
criminal fraud and abuse
of
act.
the
Yeah, there are
Computer
several.
Fraud and Abuse
So
Act.
you know what?
So
I'm going to walk back my earlier walk back. Yeah, I think Doge's activities have been criminal. I think
having said that, they haven't been prosecuted. No wonder they haven't been prosecuted because they're in bed with the anyway.
Because they're in bed with the Trump crime family that is running the government. So not yet they haven't been prosecuted, but there's still time. So here, along with every other government agency that they've tried to get access to, they tried to get access to the U.S. Copyright Office. The head of the Library of Congress said no, and then what happened?
Well, so her name is Shira Perlmutter, and Ms. Perlmutter, they didn't just want access. What they wanted is they wanted the database. So just to back up a little bit, Matt, when you or I or any lawyer registers the copyright to a work, whether it be a photo or a book, we actually have to give a copy, and 2 copies, in fact, if it's in print, or an electronic copy if it's electronic only, to the United States Copyright Office. And so they've got this vast database of everything, and you're required to do it. You don't have a choice. It's not like, oh, drop us off a copy if you feel like it, man. No, it's a requirement. So what Elon Musk's Doge group wanted was the entire database, and they wanted it for a particular purpose. They wanted it to what they call train artificial intelligence large language models, so-called LLMs.
Right.
And what's interesting here is this: they had previously used a couple other sources, including newspapers like the New York Times, and the New York Times sued them, and novels like, for example, the works of George R.R. Martin, and George R.R. Martin and other authors sued them. There's major lawsuits proceeding against them. And they're like, hey, why get the small stuff when we can get everything, the New York Times, George R.R. Martin, everything all at once in one place? What a juicy, delicious tidbit for our AI model to, quote, train on. And Matt, you and I have talked before. The training is copying, the training process is to take the copyrighted work, or in some cases you can train on things in the public domain. So taking the writing and copying it and then spitting back out, recognizing patterns.
So that the LLM can produce text.
Yes.
One word after another,
based on patterns it finds in what you copied to it. So it is the most basic form of copyright infringement. So the person who has responsibility for the Copyright Office decided, I think quite reasonably, that she didn't want to participate in copyright infringement. So she did the right thing, and she said no. So in this, and I think it's really important to emphasize that in this time of real trauma and difficulty for our country and the rule of law, there are a lot of people standing up at great personal risk and expense and doing the right thing.
Well, so you say that.
And
so what
Shira
happened to
Perlmutter
Shira
did it. Yeah, Shira Perlmutter stood up and said, no, I won't do this illegal thing. And so, of course, Trump fired her. And she didn't take that lying down. And then
well, didn't she immediately sue to
no.
stop
She filed suit in the federal circuit.
And that suit is still pending.
Yes, so we don't know where that will end up. But I think the important thing here is to say that people can stand up for what is right, and people are often very effective in doing so. And even when they don't, win right away, and some people eventually just go, I can't keep up this fight. Every little bit of resistance slows down the criminality and the destruction of rule of law in this country.
Yeah.
So I think she's one of the heroes,
Yeah.
one of the very admirable people in this process.
I think your last point, I agree with everything you said. I think your last point really needs to be emphasized. You know, friends, colleagues, people I meet walking around say, like, what's happening? How are people resisting? Why is nobody resisting? That's not true. It's never been true. I believe Democratic attorneys general of various states were preparing for this a year in advance.
Democracy Forward, there's lots of
for the
organizations.
possibility that Trump might win, looking at Project 2025, which was clearly a Trump
Public
plan.
Citizen, there are many groups that are
They had
resisting.
lawsuits ready to go against likely executive orders that followed the roadmap of Project 2025. People are resisting, people are suing, and it's important because it encourages other people to resist also. I know we talked about this in the context of law firms caving or not caving, and if we get to it, that's in our lightning round.
Yeah, we
And
better
in the
keep
context
moving.
of universities,
So
it's
let me just
great
make
to
one
see.
more point on this topic, and then I'm going to ask you about. Oh, I think we're roughly on schedule, so this is good. I'm going to ask you about our next topic, the school speech topic, in just a sec, Matt. But I want to just make one more point, which is AI. We've talked about AI before and what it's and how this so-called training process works. It's infringement at two ends, though. It's infringement at the training end when it's copying things, and then the generation end. And I just want to read one line from a recent article, which is that fans are reading through the romance novel Dark Hollow Academy Year 2 and got a nasty surprise last week in Chapter 3. In the middle of a steamy scene between the book's heroine and the Dragon Prince Ash, there's this, quote, I've rewritten the passage to align more with Jay Bree's style, which features more tension, gritty undertones, and raw emotional subtext beneath the supernatural elements, close quote. What is that? That is generative AI that wrote this book, or at least edited this book and rewrote that passage with a little note that the, quote, author forgot to delete. That's what we're getting, that kind of drivel that's generated by a computer by stealing other people's work. That's what generative AI is. Matt, let's talk about our next topic.
Sounds good.
All right. So you can't say that, school speech edition. All right, Matt. So I hear a middle schooler in Massachusetts, this young man, recently wore a shirt to school, that shirt.
That shirt, that boy,
And
that shirt.
the school didn't take kindly to it. Doesn't he have the right under the First Amendment to say what he wants and make the statement it's there are only two genders? Why can't that young man wear that shirt to school?
Great question. So, yes, this was in 2023, first in March, and then he wore the shirt modified in May of 2023.
Tell us about that modification after you finish the...
Yes, sir. So he wore the shirt to school, and his teacher, a teacher, flagged it. They brought him to the office to talk with the principal because they were concerned that the shirt would make people feel unsafe or targeted, specifically people who are LGBTQ, people who don't identify as either male or female, that they might interpret this as hate speech and as speech that targeted or threatened them. Now, do people have a right of freedom of speech? Well, yes and no. What everybody needs to remember is that the First Amendment prohibition is against the government stopping people from speaking.
Well, it's public schools, so that should be the government.
Yes, the public school is implied.
It applies to public schools.
But
right?
anytime this topic comes out, it's worth mentioning that the right of freedom of speech is only a prohibition against the government and government actors.
Right,
Now
so a private company, Starbucks could say, we don't allow that shirt in there, for example.
Private companies can do what they want.
Except they can't say we don't allow black people, and there's a public accommodations.
There's public accommodations requirement. There are plenty of exceptions to free speech. Public companies generally can do whatever they want, but there are some limited exceptions. Public actors, which means the government, but also government agencies, police and fire.
Government contractors acting under the authority of the government.
Right.
Like TSA, for example.
Yes, and also government-funded and government-run organizations like public schools and public universities, higher ed universities, the prohibition against restrictions on speech applies to them.
So what happened to this young man?
Well, what happened was the school gave him a choice, said this violates our, I forget how they phrased it, but a
Hate speech policy, right?
yeah, our hate speech policy. You can't target people, you can't make people feel unsafe.
They said not to wear the shirt to school.
They said you can change your shirt or you can go home. You can't wear this shirt at school. Now, are they trampling his First Amendment rights? No, I don't think they are. He's free to wear the shirt somewhere else, outside of school grounds, outside of school hours. If he wants to go to a Starbucks or to a Star Market, if he wants to go
stand on a street corner.
if he wants to go to a Sox game, sure. Now, those private companies can do what they want and say, you can't come in here with this shirt, or they could say, we love that shirt.
But if he stood on a major street intersection and held up a sign saying there are only two genders, no one's going to stop him from doing that.
No, he can do that. But
That's protected by the First Amendment.
that is protected by the First Amendment. But at school, and there's plenty of precedent for this going back 50, 60, 70 plus years.
All right, so Matt, that's round one. They told him you can't wear the shirt. What did he do, first of all?
Well, he refused to change it, and
He went home.
And his
Okay.
dad came and picked him up, and
All right.
he went
So
home.
then he modified the shirt, and this gets a little interesting.
Yeah, so 2 months later, and I don't have much information about what happened in those intervening 2 months, but I read an article or two about it. He first wore it in March of 2023. Then in May of 2023, one day at school, he wore the same shirt, but he'd put tape over the words to.
Only two, or there's only.
I think he put tape over the words only to. It might have been over
I think
the words.
I think it was the whole middle of it, I believe. And he put
and he on the tape, he wrote the word censored.
exactly.
So it no longer bore the same message, but then it said, I believe there are censored genders.
Right.
And the school had the same response.
Okay, so
They said this is still violating our hate speech policy. You're still trying to.
So what do the courts have to say about this? He took it to court and he said, "I have a First Amendment right."
Yes.
Where were the first?
So-
he came to the district court in Massachusetts, then the First Circuit,
Yes.
and just today the Supreme Court has spoken to this. So what?
Yes.
What do these courts say?
The federal district court said this is a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction that a government actor, the public school in Middleborough, can put in place to keep students safe and to not disrupt the learning process for
so they
students.
said the school was fine.
That's what the trial said.
Then the First Circuit Court of Appeals. What did they say?
They said we agree.
Okay.
And
And then he went
then-
to the Supreme Court.
Of course, he went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said by a 7-2 vote, we agree. This is a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction.
They refused to take the case.
Yes, they refused to take the case. It didn't get heard. This was on a vote for certiorari, the question of whether or not the Supreme
Which
Court.
requires 4 affirmative votes, and it got 2.
That's right. And the two that it got were Scalia.
Alito.
Sorry,
Alito.
Sorry,
I get them-
Scalia.
I get
Scalia
them
has
confused.
passed away.
Yes.
I almost said Scalito.
Scalito. I came down with a bad case of Scalito once, but it's
The two that voted to grant cert to take up the case and hear the
nothing a
arguments.
little hand cream won't solve, though.
If only it were that easy. man. Were Alito and Clarence Thomas.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the interesting things about this.
Yeah. I just want to ask you, Matt. Is there any precedent for this decision? You mentioned there's a lot of 50 years, 60 years of precedent, but are there any particular cases where the Supreme Court in the last few decades has taken up this issue of controversial student speech?
Yep. Yeah. So there's an interesting one that I remember discussing in law school because it had just come out when I was in law school. I believe it was a 2007 case. It's called Morse versus Frederick. It's from Juneau, Alaska, far from here, but a place that both you and I have some connection to, right? You have an aunt who lives in Sitka.
Yes, not too far away.
Yep. And I grew up in Ketchikan, also not too far away in relative terms from Juneau.
Well, oh yeah.
Right.
Well, everything's far away in Alaska.
It is. So in that case, a student had come late to school one day. The Olympic torch was passing through town, through Juneau. And it was not a school event. It was not at a school event, but the school had given the students permission, this high school
It was
students.
supervised. They had faculty of the school on site, apparently.
Yeah, because they gave the students permission to go outside.
Basically, the teachers were like, "Hey, let's go."
Let's go watch the Olympic
Yeah,
torch pass.
exactly. 'Cause
It's fun.
It
It's
was
a big
like
deal.
it's like recess.
Have you
extra
ever seen?
recess.
Have you ever seen an Olympic torch parade go by?
I have not.
I've seen one in my life. It was really fun.
Cool.
Yeah. So the school gave kids permission. They went outside. They watched the parade. One student, I believe his last name was Frederick, came. I believe he came late to school. I'm not certain if he was in school and got released or just showed up late. He was standing at this place, which was across the street from the high school, but not on school grounds, and not really at a school event, but sort of
Supervised by his teacher
sort
or
of
whatever.
at a school supervised event.
Arguably.
Arguable, either way.
Right.
And he held up a sign that said, "Bong hits for Jesus," with the numeral 4.
So that has to do with illegal drug use, presumably, right?
It's a little hard to know because it's not a message that I think anybody had ever heard before, and there was some debate as to what it actually means. Is it bong hits supporting Jesus? Is it bong hits in favor of Jesus? That's sort of the same thing. It doesn't really matter.
People were assuming the bong hits, though, were marijuana or some illegal drug, though.
Yeah, people assume the bong hits related to marijuana usage, which at the time was less legal then than it is now.
Yeah, it was thoroughly not legal. There was no ambiguity at that time.
The school principal took the sign away from him, which is a public school employee, and
So
therefore
First Amendment applies.
Therefore, the government.
And what did the Supreme Court say about this, Matt?
And when it got to the Supreme Court said, well, we think that was a reasonable use of the time, place, and manner restrictions by the school, meaning by the government, restricting that person's speech because it was sort of at a school event. That's what they decided. And because it was promoting in a vague way illegal drug use.
So
therefore, it was not
they
something
were
that the school
legitimate in
wanted.
restricting the speech. Now, as I recall, that was a 5-4 decision, and
I believe so.
The liberals on the court were saying, "Hey," they were dissenting. There were 4 liberals dissenting. John Paul Stevens,
Souter, Ginsburg, and Breyer.
Right.
Yeah. And it was a bit of a split. Well, the dissents were a bit split. There was a concurrence.
Right. But their basic point was, hey, come on, this is an overreach by the authority here.
Right.
And then the ones in the majority, because there were 5 of them, they said, no, this is fine. Now, here's what's fascinating to me, and I think you were hinting at this earlier, Matt.
Yeah.
3 members of the current Supreme Court were on the Supreme Court for that decision.
Yes.
And
Roberts, Alito, Thomas.
And now Roberts was among the conservatives saying restricting free speech was okay with the bong and it's okay with the genders. But what about the other 2, Matt? Are they ideologically consistent?
Well, I don't know if we know that for certain because the Supreme Court isn't going to hear the case of the student from Middleborough. But they voted to grant cert, which they would only do if they wanted to try to overturn in part the decision or make some pronouncement that they thought this was.
Just to be clear, Thomas and Alito said, oh yes, you can tell this child who isn't even in a school, who's on a parade route, that he can't have the bong hits for Jesus sign.
Right.
But God forbid you should have this 2 genders thing.
Right, and have this boy prevented from wearing a shirt.
Yeah,
that says
exactly.
There are only 2
that you
genders.
should that is a First Amendment issue.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you why I think it's hypocrisy.
Yeah.
It's hypocrisy, Matt, because they pretend to be originalists. They pretend that their only source of authority on anything, it isn't the live Constitution doctrine where you think, well, society's views change, we're going to reinterpret things. No, they want to know what people thought at the founding. So what they're saying is that those founding fathers thought that that bong hits for Jesus definitely not okay speech, but there are only 2 genders were. And where do they find that in the Constitution, Matt? Or the contemporary writings?
I am not familiar with that provision of the Constitution.
Or the contemporary writings, because they look at those to get.
Yeah.
I don't believe the Federalist Papers touched on bong hits for Jesus.
And apparently, even some of the other conservatives on the current Supreme Court, who at times
all of the other conservatives thought that this they didn't want to take the look at this.
That this was a reasonable.
This was fine.
That this was a reasonable time,
including,
place, and
by the
manner
way,
restriction.
3 of whom were appointed by Trump.
Yes.
So we're not talking raving liberals thought this was. No. I mean, it's just transparent hypocrisy.
Yes.
All right. Speaking of transparent hypocrisy,
What do we got next, Ken?
I think we're ready for our lightning round.
Let's go.
I mean, okay. I got to tell you, this first one, I've read a lot of court decisions in my time.
Yeah.
Okay, I've read a lot. Lightning. There it is.
I put that up there. And
I like the
I
lightning.
gave credit because we don't want to use a photo without
Yes.
credit and
Very
compliance
good.
with license terms. The patent image is free. Patent
Yeah,
images
right.
are free of copyright generally.
Thank you.
This is our general
So-
lightning round slide. What's our
we're gonna
first
spend-
lightning round
okay.
topic?
All right,
and
let's
fast.
Yes, thanks, Matt. Thanks for that long introduction.
You're welcome.
So our first lightning round discussion or topic is, I think we're calling. Well, let me just give the context. Wilmer Hale's a very big law firm.
Mm-hmm.
They have represented some people that President Trump doesn't like,
Mm-hmm.
and so, like many other law firms, he decided to punish them. And the way he wanted to punish them, he issued an executive order. He did this for other law firms like Paul Weiss, for them, to them.
Mm-hmm.
And what he says in this executive order is you can't have any access to federal buildings and federal records, and you can't get security clearance. And of course, this stops them from representing a lot of clients, in effect, and it basically kills a large part of their practice. And so to avoid this, some firms like Paul Weiss have said, we'll give you, I don't know, $50 million in pro bono legal services. Well, Wilmer Hale said, no, we're not going to do that. And instead they sued. And so the federal judge who is hearing this case, who is a George W. Bush appointee, a very conservative judge, did something amazing in this decision.
Yeah, I know you've got a printout of it. We also had a copy on screen in one of the slides.
Yeah.
If we could get it up for folks,
yeah.
but please read
Okay.
it for us.
Well,
then.
here's what I want to tell you. What's amazing is I've read a lot of federal court decisions, a lot of state court decisions. Very rarely, except within a quotation, does a federal judge ever use an exclamation point. This decision is chock full of exclamation points, including on the first page. I'm going to read a quote from that, and then a quote from page 18 and a quote from page 67.
All right, just read fast. It's
All
a
right, I
lightning
will.
round.
I know it's lightning, but people want to hear these. The cornerstone of the American system of justice is an independent judiciary and an independent bar, that's what the Lawyers Association, willing to tackle unpopular cases, however daunting. The founding fathers knew this! Exclamation point. And then at the end of that paragraph, indeed, to rule otherwise, when he grants the motion, throwing out totally invalidating the order, the Trump executive order.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, indeed, to rule otherwise would be unfaithful to the judgment and vision of the founding fathers. What do I love about that, Matt? You know what I love about that. That's originalist.
That's originalist.
he's saying the founding fathers would have found, and of course, another exclamation point.
And it's true. The founding fathers would have found the Trump acts and all these executive orders to be abominable.
Okay, page 18. Defendants, meaning the Trump administration, argue that Wilmer Hale's alleged injuries are speculative. Focusing only on Section 3 of the order, they assert that since the firm has not alleged that it is a federal contractor or that it intends to bid for a contract, its injury is conjecture. Please, that dog won't hunt! Exclamation point. You gotta love a federal judge who says that dog won't hunt. And then finally, in issuing the order, on page 67, though the order does not, and this is the order of the Trump executive order, does not directly prohibit criminal defendants from hiring Wilmer Hale as their counsel, it certainly has that effect! Exclamation point. So he's not buying any of the crap, and he does something which is also, in addition to the exclamation points, which is extraordinary, which he grants more relief to Wilmer Hale than they ask for.
Yeah.
He does more. So anyway, I think this is so important.
This had better be upheld by all the judges on appeals courts who claim to be originalists and to care about what the Constitution
It'll
says.
be so interesting to
Yeah.
see what happens on the bill. I predict this will be upheld.
I think so too.
And I think that Trump's assaults, two of his major assaults, are on rule of law, in other words, attacking lawyers who represent his opponents,
Yes.
and on universities. Both of those, the courts are not going to hear any of it.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not going to take any of it.
Ken, I don't
All
want
right.
to take away from that, but
Okay, you got two lightning round
we
topics.
got 4 minutes. Let's go.
You got the second lightning round topic. Tell us about
So
it.
this one caught my eye because I love Led Zeppelin. I used to listen to a lot of Led Zeppelin. I used to go to the Led Zeppelin laser shows at the Museum of Science, at the planetarium, which honestly were a lot of fun.
They are awesome.
So there's a story about Jimmy Page and a re-release of Yardbirds albums and somebody suing over violation of copyright. But actually, the guy, his name is Jake Holmes, he wrote the song Dazed and Confused in 1967. Then the Yardbirds adapted it, made different versions of it, recorded them eventually, played them on tour. Then, after the Yardbirds and Jimmy Page formed Led Zeppelin, they recorded a more famous version of the song. There's some cover art. And now Holmes, the songwriter, is suing not for the copyright infringement, because he sued about that in 2010 and it was settled. He's suing because the new documentary, a new re-release of old material by the Yardbirds, doesn't properly credit him and doesn't pay him the royalties that they agreed to pay him.
Contract breach!
As a breach of contract from their settlement of the lawsuit in 2012. And I thought this was fun. Folks, if you sign a contract, this is the big takeaway. If you sign a contract, keep it handy and abide by the terms of it. Tell your lawyers about it.
And by the way, also, this is really relevant to statutes of limitations, because people might think, oh, this is ancient history. No, because the obligation under the contract is ongoing. There's no statute of limitations violation. It's not from the time the contract was signed. It's from when you breached the contract, and they breached recently when they re-released it.
Right. All right, so that's one. The other one, and this is just fun, this made the rounds among lawyers. A guy, I'm trying to remember where, I believe he's based in Michigan.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, filed a lawsuit. Now, in the center of your screen, you see the guy's logo, cool logo, dragon in a suit, I love it. He filed a lawsuit like you see on the left side of the screen.
And
here,
by the way,
this
is how lawsuits usually look. I don't know if we can get a tight shot of this.
Yeah. The exposure is hard, but lawsuits look pretty boring.
Yes.
It's just black text.
You don't have color.
On white paper, there's no color, there's no highlighting. And this one...
You don't have watermarks.
You definitely don't have watermarks. And this one, what you can see here is he put up, a watermark. Now, I just put the first page of the suit, but it's on every page.
It's a freaking dragon in a suit on every page, huge, covering almost the whole page.
Now, to be fair, it's a cool watermark. But it's also really, really unprofessional.
It's ridiculous.
And in addition to that, he's got a bunch of, I think this is just branding. His purple color, like the dragon.
Dragon layer species in purple.
It's got his signature. Now comes plaintiff.
He's got a lot of. He likes purple the way you like orange matte.
He's also got a little logo
in the corner. Oh my goodness!
In the corner. It's unprofessional.
Yeah.
And the judge
You can only be that unprofessional if you're the president.
I'm going to give you
States.
zero guesses. Wait. I'm going to give you zero guesses as to what happened. The judge said, no, I will not accept this as filed.
He rejected the filing and made the guy refile it.
Try it again.
And excoriated him, and it's
now, was it worth it for this guy?
Maybe he got some publicity.
I bet he got some publicity.
It's not as bad as using AI to make up court decisions for your. Okay,
that's true.
All right. Let me just hit our very last one of these.
Do it fast.
I'm going to read you the headline. Judge blocks Trump administration from revoking student visas. This is one of the most powerfully written decisions. This is people have heard already. So basically what happened is the Judge Jeffrey White of the Northern District of California provided relief to every single student, a nationwide injunction, who is a foreign student who's attending school in the U.S., saying, no, Trump can't kick you out of the country and revoke your visa. No, nothing negative can happen to you while this case is proceeding. And by the way, the universities can continue to bring in more students that are from other countries, even though then today, of course, they said they're going to put a hold on the interview process for the visas. But this is a very powerful nationwide injunction, more evidence that the courts aren't going to stand for this unconstitutional garbage we're getting.
Excellent. Ken, always a pleasure.
It's great to see you, Matt. And I think this was a pretty solid show. I'm pretty happy with it.
It's always fun to talk with you about issues in the news.
From a legal perspective.
There you go.
And I hope that folks at home will join us again next time, which will be presumably the fourth Tuesday.
Fourth Tuesday.
Fourth Tuesday of the month, assuming, give or take, in the summer, a little bit. And I really think that we'll probably have something or other to talk about. What do you think?
We'll find something.
Anyway, before I forget.
Thanks, folks.
Congratulations, congratulations to our director, Will Carlisle, on graduating just a couple of days ago from Boston College. He's now a bachelor. So
Congratulations, Will.
Yay, Will!
Hey.
And thanks to Will and to everyone at New TV for the fabulous work you do in bringing this on. We're putting more and more of it online. So if you're not watching this online, you can watch it online. Posting them to Blue Sky. And so
We're going to wrap it up.
yeah, so please join us again next time when we discuss issues in the news.
From a legal perspective. Thanks, guys.